We're going to compare performance, we're going to compare the design, and any other questions you have, I will be answering all of them. Let's get into the review. The design of the MacBook Pro is still better. There's no doubt in my mind about that. The Razer Blade design is almost as good, and they're trying. They know a lot of the things that make the design good, and the fact that they're attempting to do it is almost as good. But the reality is, on the MacBook Pro, you can still open it up with one finger. It still boots faster, which is better. It's got the Touch ID, which when it works is really good. It's just overall the design is better. Razer's good. Razer has the best design that is like a MacBook. I've seen Microsoft do some very similar things. Microsoft actually has developed their own identity now. They're no longer just copying Mac. It's got the metal design is great, but when you first open it up, it's just, the notch isn't as good. You can hardly get your finger in there. The notch is there, just not as good. They could just make the notch better, And then when you open it, it actually almost kind of hurts your finger. There's just too much pressure, and it's almost 2 to 3 times harder to open. You have to apply a lot more pressure, right? When you open it up, it's looking pretty similar. It's looking like it's got very similar design, very simple. I like that. All metal body, very, very good design. I really, really like it. But, on the MacBook Pro, everything's just a little bit better. A better trackpad. The trackpad is better because it's bigger. It's more precise. The haptic feedback when you're clicking on a Mac, it's better. The sound is better. You can click at the bottom, you can click at the top. Now the port selection, on a Razer Blade, you're gonna get all your favorite ports. And I love this. This is great. I know in the future everything will be USB-C, but Apple has been hinting at this since 2015 with their 12-inch, and when the 2016 came around, they went all USB-C. 4 to 5 years later, we're still having to use dongles. We're still not ready. It could take another 5 years. And actually, by the time cloud computing catches up, we're going to stream all of our machines. This nonsense, I don't know. In one respect, if I could have any port, yes, it would be USB-C. But it takes more of a professional to set it up to make it work. Right? You got 4 USB-Cs. This could be 3 to 4 monitors, right? On the Razer Blade, I only have possibly 2 monitors with mini display port and HDMI, which, it's good enough. Honestly, I did away with all my monitors. I thought it was kind of worthless, kind of not as useful. But, when you need the ports, they're just here. You got the micro SD card slot, which Apple did away back in 2015. Their MacBook Pros, that was the last time they had the micro SD card slot. Please let me know in the comment section below which device you want to get. I will be reviewing the gaming of these 2 machines a little bit more in depth, but if you want to see what the gaming is like, that's coming up next. We can take a quick peek at it and see how good that is. If you have any questions, please let me know down below. I am willing to do certain tests. If you guys have some questions about certain things, I can run some tests, and I can let you know how the machines stack up. First glance at 35 FPS, it doesn't look like it's too impressive, but one thing to note is we are running here at full resolution, which is like 3000 by 2000, which is pretty impressive performance, and it's actually quite smooth. If you try to reduce it to 1080p, you get that annoying mini screen, so I had to put it back to native, which kind of sucks. But if you compare it versus the Razer doesn't have any of these issues. This is some kind of optimization problem that I was having with the MacBook Pro. MacBook Pro with Doom actually performs quite well. We got all the graphics maxed. We're able to run at 1080p. We're getting about 60, 70, 80 frames per second. So the performance is really good. I was very impressed. It honestly depends on the developers and which game you play, because most games are actually going to run quite well. There are a few that the FPS can drop in, but overall it seems to game quite well with the 8GB card. If you compare it to the Razer Blade, it's getting almost double, sometimes triple the FPS, and part of that has to do with the fact that it has about double or to triple
power that it's getting from its power brick. For more optimized titles like Counter-Strike Global Offensive, you're getting FPS in the hundreds, like 130, 160, and the same thing for Razer Blade. Counter-Strike's not really a game that we have difficulty running these days. Rust is kind of a mixed bag because I was having some issues with its resolution, but as long as you select borderless, it actually fixes it and you can play. So even if you reduce the graphics, it doesn't give you any extra FPS unless you reduce everything pretty much down to potato graphics. But on max graphic with 1080p, you're getting about 45 frames, sometimes 50, sometimes 35 in very dense areas. But overall, it seems to run decent on the MacBook Pro. On the Razer Blade, as you can see, about 45 to 60, sometimes 70, sometimes 80. I thought I would get much better FPS on my Razer Blade, but for this specific game, this is something to do with the developers of Rust. They're kind of really bad at optimizing hardware. In Natural Selection 2, I noticed that it runs quite well on both Mac and the Razer Blade. On the Mac, you're getting anywhere from 50 to 100 FPS, although I did feel some kind of weird input lag. And on the Razer Blade, it just runs exceptionally smooth. Again, keep in mind the Razer Blade does have the G-Sync screen, which adds an extra layer of fluidity that you can't really see in the video, but you can feel it while gaming. So gaming truly is important. I would say stick to it on a gaming machine. So during load, you get about 52 on the Razer Blade, and on the MacBook Pro, you get about 55 dBA. Both are kind of similar in terms of volume level. It's kind of like pick your poison. Do you want one that's lower pitched or higher pitched? I believe the MacBook Pro is slightly lower pitched than the Razer Blade, but it's still fairly loud. Both machines have thermal and power limit throttling issues. On the MacBook Pro, since it only has a 100-watt charger, it throttles the GPU and CPU. As you can see, the graph is going up and down, and both the CPU and GPU are trading places, sometimes getting enough power, sometimes not. And you could see the FPS drop from 35 frames, sometimes down to 15, sometimes down to 8, sometimes down to 5. So it kind of really sucks because sometimes you're gaming great and sometimes you're throttling like crazy. And it's a heat issue too, because when it gets too hot, it also decreases the performance. So it's kind of bouncing back and forth between overheating and not having enough power, because the device is quite hungry. Now for games like Natural Selection 2, it only really needs the GPU and not so much the CPU, and so as you can see, the CPU has a lot less load, and so it can power the GPU, and the game runs much better than Rust as a result. So games that have high emphasis on CPU and GPU tend to lag a lot more, and games that are poorly optimized will lag on the MacBook Pro. But overall, even though it's got thermal and power limit issues, I'm still very impressed that they're able to pull this off on the MacBook Pro with its 100-watt package. It's very impressive that they're able to do that. Of course, if gaming is your main priority, not just productivity, then in that case I would still get the Razer Blade, because even though it still does throttle, you're still only running at 3.2, not 4 gigahertz, but 3.2.
On the Mac, you also have speakers that are, let's just say they blew my mind. I didn't think that it was possible to make speakers that good. On the Razer Blade, speakers are acceptable, right? I'm not complaining about them. Same thing with the trackpad. Even though I'm saying it's not as good, this trackpad is the best you can get out there in the PC Windows world. It's the best.
The MacBook Pro is about 30% larger, it's silkier, it has better precision with the mouse movement, and the clicking is superior. And now a word from our sponsors. PDFelement allows you to easily edit, annotate, and convert PDFs. This is one of my favorite PDF editing applications I've ever used. It's much easier to use than what Adobe provides and is substantially cheaper. The PDF experience is simplified. It's fast and easy to use, and it has robust features. The brand new UI makes it really easy to work with. You can find whichever buttons or customization options really fast. This makes for fast editing. And if you're doing any kind of conversions or working with any type of specific file, it keeps the font and format the same, so you're never worried about inconsistencies with file formats or fonts. It can work with a scanned PDF or an image-based PDF. The elements within the PDF are selectable and searchable. PDFelement also has powerful batch processing for optimization or data extraction.
I think you should take my thought process with it, and I would say that USB-C is more of a positive than a negative, but you might decide that for you it's more of a negative, right? And if it's more of a negative, Razer Blade is going to be your machine. When it comes to raw performance, you know, you can get a 6-core, 8-core on here, but the 8-core is going to thermal throttle, power limit throttling, gets too hot, the power brick can't feed it enough power, so it doesn't even run at the right performance level. But you know, it's still great performance, it's just you're not getting the performance, right? With this, you have the same problem, but not as much. You're getting about 30% more performance with the same specifications on this, because the cooling is really, it's impressive. Razer's done a great job with the cooling. You have these two little fans in the front that suck air in, and then you have fans that push it out. So the air literally travels all throughout here. And on the inside, you got a vapor chamber like cooling system. It's not just heat pipe, it's vapor chamber, which is very different. Well, I mean, in principle, it's the same thing, but it's a chamber as opposed to just a pipe. And so as it gets hot, the liquid moves around, it flows through the area, and it kind of cools it much better. Price-wise, you're looking at spending at least $2,000 for this model or this model, but you're always going to spend more on the Mac because, you know, upgrading is harder. You know, I spent $300, I put 64 gigs of RAM in here. There's two removable storage drives in here that I can upgrade anytime I want. Put it in there. I have more control over my machine here. On Mac, Apple's got more control. But Apple makes sure that the experience is just a little bit nicer. It's nicer, you can't deny it, it's nicer. You got the nicer keyboard, you got the nicer speakers, you got the nicer trackpad, everything is nicer, you got the nicer corners, everything is nicer on a Mac. But I run into issues on the Mac OS, like I have some issues with Adobe and Final Cut. You know, certain things just don't work right, and it's so hard to get it to work right, so hard. In theory, I could run into those same software-related issues on Windows, but I just, for some reason, I just deal with the problem better on Windows. I don't know why that is, I just do. And so, if you want a nicer experience, go with the Mac, but I still think that the Razer Blade is a better machine, even though they don't execute everything better. There's things like, slightly different things, like being able to upgrade your machine. You know, RAM or SSD upgrades, that's phenomenal to me. Being able to cool the device better, I've always been really angry at Apple with their cooling and their heating and their thermal throttling and their power limit throttling issues. You know, generally all laptops have that issue now because everybody's pushing for that thin design, but I've noticed on the Windows machines, they tend to do a better job cooling it. You know, with Apple, you're really going into a completely different ecosystem. Apple supports their products better. When I have a problem and I try to reach out to Razer, it's much harder to get help, okay? And I can't go to a Razer store and have them fix my issue that I'm having, or like I've bought two Razer machines, the 15-inch and the 17-inch. Both have had issues with their keyboard. The button is all kind of crooked and depressed, and it's kind of hard to see, but you can see some of the issues here. Take a look at some of these buttons here. They're just not as aligned. The lighting on the keyboard is not as uniform. There's more light bleed around the keys. I run into defects more, and that makes sense. I mean, they're a smaller company, and I'm okay with that. I understand that. I'm not gonna just get mad at them for that, but you run into some quality issues here and there. The actual ports themselves are sort of slightly misaligned, so sometimes plugging in a USB or plugging in USB-C, it just, you know, it nicks the edges of the circumference of the port. When you're pushing it, it nicks it, and then it's like, oh, that's annoying. It's not as good, but you know, it still works. Everything works fine. The paint job on this black edition, I've heard that you can chip it almost from day one. People have been chipping their devices. I have not chipped any of my this device yet, but I suspect that I may chip it at some point. Every time I've had a problem with my Mac, Apple has been able to fix it, and I've had periods where I don't have any issues for 1 or 2 years or 3 years with some of my devices. Or like on my iMac, I had an issue where when I was compiling my Which MacBook video for 2015, just to compile that video crashed my iMac, and I had to literally send it to Apple. I sent it to them 3 times. They had to send it to their engineers to fix it. A special group had to try to fix it because it was just too hard to fix. So some of the issues you run in a Mac, you know, you will never fix them. The issues you run into on a Razer, you can deal with them. You can fix them, you know, if it's software related and sometimes hardware. But you know, and so you get that freedom. You get the freedom to try to fix it yourself. On a Mac, you ain't gonna fix nothing yourself. It's so hard to fix things on a Mac. And once it breaks and once it has issues, it's just, you know, you're kind of at the mercy of Apple. But overall, you know, the experiences are a little different. The texture of the actual device is also inferior. The texture, it kind of rubs your skin off a little bit, and so like this grimy, slimy, like snot-like texture starts to build up on the keyboard, and over time it really kind of sucks, which I really don't like. And the texture on the Mac, it just feels nicer. It feels better, you know. And the curves. I know you're gonna say this is stupid, but the curves, they're way better. This rounded curve, I never find myself somehow being annoyed by it, or hitting it, or somehow when I'm using the Razer blade, I can feel that somehow it's too sharp. These edges are too sharp on the Razer blade, and it cuts into my hand, and I find that really, really, really annoying. So like when I rest my hand right here on the Razer blade, when I'm typing and stuff, it's just a little bit too sharp. And then these corners are also not as rounded. And round things, they're more beautiful. They work better. And you know, obviously Razer blade can't just copy that exact corner, but you know, they can make it maybe more round or a little less round. Right now, the roundness is good, but it's kind of not as good. And you got stupid things like this, it just dims too fast. The out-of-box experience is worse. On a Mac, you turn it on, there's no ads, there's no McAfee, nothing's popping up. Nothing's trying to get you to like sign up to their newsletter or whatever, which is kind of annoying. And you know, I mean, who wants to be seen with this super ugly Razer logo? I mean, that honestly, if I could choose a device, I have already made my decision. I've chosen the Razer blade, but this is ugly. They really got to do something about this. I've done a review on the Mercury White Edition, which I think looks better. This is just too gamery. Like the Razer blade's trying to market to gamers and professionals, but it's still kind of more gamery. And you got the keyboard that can change colors and all that, which is kind of cool, but it's not as good. But overall, for me, I still think the Razer blade is the way to go, even though it's not as good. But there are just a few things that I love, like being able to fix it, being able to service it, and having a good graphics card. Even though the 16-inch MacBook Pro does have the 8GB card, I have tested it, and the software that supports the 8GB card on here is not as good. You know, I try to play Rust, it lags pretty bad. It's doable. I can play at like 30, 40 frames if I kind of tweak the graphics a little bit. Here, I can play Rust Max, right? On a Mac, I have to either boot into Windows, or if I'm running in the Mac OS environment, the drivers are not as good because there's no DirectX, right? Because Microsoft created DirectX and it's good on Windows machines. That's why the gaming is better on here. On the Mac, you know, they kind of crucified the gaming back in the 80s. There's a whole story about that. I might talk about that at some point, but if you're wondering why gaming on Mac has been worse for a while now, there's a reason for it. But Mac, Apple cares, they're gonna make it better, but the hardware here is great. Like the specifications, the video card and the CPU are great, but they don't utilize the hardware as well, and that really ticks me off. That's like a weird personal thing that's kind of screwy in my own brain about this whole thing. Every person is going to have their own specific thing that irks them inside. For me, it just happens to be that.
So the Razer Blade screen is really sharp and has some of the best colors in the industry. It's got sRGB 100%, and the colors are exceptionally vibrant, crisp. The viewing angles are very impressive as well, and you can get it in Adobe sRGB as well if you want it with a 4K screen option, although I settled for the 1080p because I figured it would be good enough for my needs. On the MacBook Pro, it has the P3 wide color gamut, so essentially it has some overlap with the sRGB, but it also has some colors that are superior, although I'm not really sure who it would be specifically for. If you guys know, please leave a comment down below. I'm still trying to figure this one out. I know that it has one screen option and it has higher pixels per square inch, so it does have, I would say, a superior screen to the 1080p option.